Hey there! The other day I was checking the comments of my ImSim tier list video and someone asked me about which immersive sims are the best to get started with. Now, I've been doing this a long time, so long in fact that most of the time when someone asks me if I'm gonna do a video about something, my usual response is to go, oh yeah, I made a video about that like a few years ago. But then I realized I never actually did make an ImSim starter guide. This just sort of happens when you've been making videos for 11 years. Sometimes you gotta check if you actually did it or not because, you know. We're gonna do this by briefly going over 10 immersive sims divided up into 3 categories based on how accessible they are. Beginner ImSims, which is self-explanatory. Intermediate immersive sims, which are going to be things that, while accessible, would probably throw you for a loop if you just dive straight into them without any prior knowledge. And finally, games that are for advanced box stackers only. These are things that, unless you're really dialed in on how to play a game without straightforward objectives or where direct combat is not nearly the best approach, you're gonna have a bad time. Then when we're done, I'll rattle off a few more games for you to try in case you aren't feeling any of these or want to add even more games to your wish list since that big old Steam sale's going on. Let's talk about what might be your baby's first 0451. With these 4 starter games, you're gonna find at least something you like, and I actually had to think a bit about the rough order these should be in, say for the first, since they're all pretty accessible for the most part. They're new enough that modern operating systems are fine with them without needing to install mods or fan patches, and 3 of these 4 games are available on console online marketplaces if you just don't want to play them on your PC for some reason. Out of these 4 starter games, the first you should try is Deus Ex Human Revolution. The game's $20 on Steam and by all accounts should run fine on anything Windows 7 or newer. Deus Ex Human Revolution is the prequel to the classic immersive sim Deus Ex, and funnily enough is not only the best place to get started with the series, but is also chronologically the first game. Human Revolution plays as a combination of a first-person shooter and an Xbox 360 era cover shooter from the outset, and if you're really determined, you can get through it without installing any major augmentations. Human Revolution hits that sweet spot of being high fidelity enough to where it's not so old it feels like you're playing a period piece, but also from long enough ago that this thing will basically run on your toaster. Human Revolution does a good job at centering the game around all the abilities the player character Adam Jensen gets through his mechanical augmentations, which he never asked for, and the plot of the game is centered around it too. There is plenty of references to the original game in Human Revolution, but nothing so important that you'll need to play it to know what's going on. In fact, Human Revolution was my first Deus Ex game, and I was able to appreciate the story just fine. The whole game is also built around having many ways to accomplish a task, with just about any tool that's available to you being viable for something. You can sweet talk a bartender at a nightclub to get a meeting with a local crime boss, or just go break into his office. Don't like that side quest that made you pay a shitload of cash to settle someone else's debt? Literally just knock out the loan shark as soon as he walks away. It's not your problem he couldn't hold on to the money. Human Revolution is a great game in the way that it just makes it totally plausible to play the game as straightforward as possible, but it's going to take a lot of willpower to do that since you'll keep finding yourself saying stuff like, yeah, you know, I could probably get up onto the side of this building and sneak in through that open window, instead of like fighting your way through the lower floors of a place. Something that's just a little bump up in complexity to Deus Ex Human Revolution, but is still extremely accessible, is Dishonored. In a way of speaking, that is, these are almost interchangeable. Dishonored is a much more linear affair than Human Revolution, but instead makes the powers of the outsider, the catalyst for the character's fantastical abilities, near on essential to completing levels. Sure, it's possible to play this like a normal human being, but that's going to be quite the ordeal. Dishonored's abilities are a whole lot of fun and give you a heck of a lot of ways to complete your mission, and more than just do you run up and stab your target or do you find an alternate path to non-lethally remove the guy from the picture. Dishonored has some great levels that are more like stealth playgrounds, but don't let that deceive you. You can play this game with maximum violence. You can use guns or swords or just throw big cans of whale oil into the most inconvenient place possible. As you can see from my own gameplay though, I am a fan of being extra sneaky. Now for something a little more recent, Arcane's Deathloop. Deathloop came out in late 2021 and is kind of a greatest hits of all the immersive sim mechanics that Arcane has made in their games up until that point, including Dishonored. We're not going to get into what they did after this game though. Deathloop is a little of everything when it comes to things found in immersive sims. Double jumps and teleporting among other abilities, stealth versus direct combat with just about everything in between working, such as setting up traps or hacking turrets to do the murder for you. Deathloop is about being stuck in a time loop, and the only way to get out of it is to kill 8 dudes who are all in different places at different times. You are given a whole lot of freedom in how you do that, but be aware that there are other people immune to the loop's effects, and they want to stop you from doing this. While it's not my favorite immersive sim by quite a bit, it's still accessible enough thanks to modern controls and being made recently that it's a good starter game. The trade-off though is that it's got some of that modern game stink on it, like color-tiered weapons and things that feel like they were very much set up as a way to grind in order to pad out the playtime, which is why, despite it being the most modern game out of the 4 I'm going to recommend here, it's nowhere near the first choice. Now finally, for baby's first box stacker, we have the direct sequel to Human Revolution, Deus Ex: Mankind Divided. If you're trying to do things optimally, I'd say that the best way to go about this is to first play Human Revolution, see if you like it, and if you do, play Mankind Divided immediately after as your next major step into immersive sims. Mankind Divided has all the stuff that Human Revolution had in it, and adds a bunch more on top of that. Mankind Divided also refines the game's hub worlds, with Prague being a lot better of a place than most of the hub worlds in the previous game, and not quite on the level of Hong Kong though. Mankind Divided has a lot more going on than Human Revolution, such as needing to change your ammo types in order to deal with certain enemies, and branching paths that might lock you out of other parts of the game. There's also this stupid breach mode that went over about as well as you'd expect tacking a freemium shooter onto a story-focused single-player game would go, but your best bet for that is just never look at it. Don't even perceive it in your mind. Alright, you've tried some easier to get into immersive sims, and now you're ready for the bread and butter. Stuff that's something everyone who's into these games that use the code 0451 should say they've played, but not the most immediately accessible things. Maybe they're fairly complicated or need you to do some sort of extra thing to get them running on modern systems. Don't worry, I've got you covered on those extra steps. First on the intermediate list is Typhon, which is not actually what the game is called, but what I choose to call it. Its given name, Prey, was only really made that by a decree of the higher-ups who might have only wanted to name it that for intellectual property reasons. There was some other stuff going on with another developer who just so happened to have previously made a game called Prey, but we're getting a bit sidetracked here and I don't want to speculate too much. Typhon, aka Prey 2017, is one of the best when it comes to AAA developed immersive sims, but there are some barriers to entry. First off, you're going to need to install this on an SSD, since otherwise this game loads slow. Secondly, Typhon does not hold your hand when it comes to how things are done. You are expected to know that your glue gun is not just for putting out fires or briefly containing electrical shorts, stunning enemies, and plugging breaches in pipes, but also a universal path-making tool and a bunch of other things that basically let you get anywhere. Typhon also has some pretty wild special abilities that you can level into throughout the course of the game. You're given 2 branching paths where one major tree of abilities are more mundane, like what you might find in Deus Ex, like having a higher health pool, better hacking, the ability to fortify machinery, and then a whole nother tree of abilities based on the aliens you encounter that gives you stuff like making shadow clones of yourself, mind control, or transforming yourself into a coffee cup so that you can sneak through small spaces. I'd suggest starting this one with a playthrough that uses only the normie skills, and then another was Typhon's skills, because the latter also has additional challenges associated with it. Now, for the next 2 games, they are entirely interchangeable in how essential they are. They're both like right next to each other. Both of these have GOG versions that run just fine out of the box, but also have guides on their Steam community pages that will tell you exactly what you need to do to get them running. Both of these are absolute classics that are instantly associated with immersive sims. Going in chronological order, first up is System Shock 2. System Shock 2 is close to 25 years old now, and as a side note, I am making a prediction. System Shock 2 Enhanced Edition will be released by Night Dive on August 11th, 2024, the 25-year anniversary of System Shock 2's original launch. SS2 is not only an amazing game, but also the common ancestor of many, many modern games. So many things it tried out got adopted across all of the games industry. There's a lot you can do with System Shock 2, not only in just a technological and magic-adjacent science psionic abilities, but also by adapting the alien's powers, spending time in the lab researching things you find, or just not giving a damn about any of it and shooting your way through the Van Braun. A fun little thing you can do if you've got the time is play System Shock 2 and then its direct successor, BioShock, back to back, and you'll notice a lot of familiar sounds or stylings between the two games. And after System Shock 2 came out not even a year later, we got Deus Ex, arguably the immersive sim. Heck, a post-mortem blog made by the game's creator Warren Spector is the first time the term was used in public. Even if you don't get the GOG version, the only thing you really need to get this running perfectly fine on modern operating systems is something called Kenty's Launcher. And that's like the first thing you're going to see in the Steam guides. Heck, if you really want to, there's full overhaul mods like Deus Ex Revision, but personally, I'd say try playing with the original stuff first. Heck, if you're really determined, there's even a PlayStation 2 version of this game that has nicer textures, which I regret not picking up for like $10 at an old game store back when I lived out west. Deus Ex is a game where everything is on the table, and they planned for you to find some outrageous solutions to the task presented. A great example of this is that in almost all walkthroughs available for the game, they say that rather than doing a certain mission traditionally in a straightforward stealth or combat way, just slot into your leg enhancements that let you run fast enough to just blaze past everyone guarding this building, and then when you get to the thing you need at the top, just fall off the ledge of the building because the same leg enhancements minimize your fall damage. The original Deus Ex also has some of the most amazing hub worlds too. Hong Kong has to be one of the best of all time. One last word of advice. I know you've heard of it, but do not try playing the Malkavian mod until after you've well and truly mastered this game. And now we're on to games that are for advanced box stackers only. Games I've at least talked about before, but you've probably heard about them from other places. Things that are by all accounts intriguing to watch or hear about, but most likely if you tried playing them before without really getting acquainted with immersive sims, you might have gotten, as the kids say, filtered. Don't worry. You're ready now. First up is Control-Alt-Ego, one of my favorite games to come out of this decade and pretty much pure, undiluted immersive sim. Control-Alt-Ego added a gun into the game as an afterthought towards the end of development, which should tell you just how diverse all the solutions to the puzzles in this game are. And it is rather puzzly, at least for the first third of the game. The game starts with you in a near-linear tutorial area, which, while you can explore freely after a certain point, you'll be unlocking it bit by bit. But then, in the next area, the game opens wide up. Then, after you get through that whole area, you're just put into space. You can literally fly around anywhere and do things however you can possibly think of doing them with the abilities you've gotten. Control-Alt-Ego is an amazing experience so long as you know how to approach the game. It's a game where you cannot truly die because your character is a disembodied consciousness that can hijack all the machinery around it, but you can and will get stuck if you aren't careful or don't think outside the box enough. If you can color outside the lines without flinching though, you're gonna have a great time with this one. Now for something a little more, jarring. Cruelty Squad. Cruelty Squad is particularly intense because not only do you need to get past the initially jarring aesthetic, but you also have to be pretty damn good at shooters and immersive sims to get by. Sure, me being an advanced box stacker, I can now pretty easily get through this game and need to turn on Hope Eradicated to feel challenged, but I'd understand if you didn't believe a word of that, as this footage I have is from when the game first dropped in early access 2 years ago and the stock market was considered a hot new thing that just got added in. This game also has a fully functioning stock market. You heard me right. You will need to learn how to manipulate it in order to buy all the gear. Once you get past the first few missions, hopefully not incurring the regeneration machine before you've had a chance to get deep into the game, Cruelty Squad really starts to open up as items like the Grapendix and the Super Kick that will literally insta-jib anyone that isn't wearing heavy armor become available to you. The best way I can put it is that after a certain point, you just start to get Cruelty Squad, and you see beyond its garish textures and strange dialogue. Now you only see the market and acquisition opportunities. The final game on this starter guide is something that only the highest net worth individuals from Cruelty Squad are capable of truly appreciating. Something that goes beyond your ability to create financial gains and into the realm of your metaphysical fortitude. Something that is somehow cyberpunk and high fantasy at the same time. It's Divine Cybermancy. Yep, you've probably heard about this one, but might have been too scared to play it. If you've managed to make it through the last 9 games, you might stand a chance of getting through at least one cycle of guilt. Is weird, like even from a development standpoint. It's the first standalone game the developers had made, and it was on the Source engine, which, while very accessible for modding, is quite an ideal to make a game out of from the ground up unless you are turn of the century Valve. Has insane amounts of researching, grinding, and cheesing before you even start to get the cool abilities, and even then you are just barely scratching the surface. You will need to complete this game at least 3 times to get the true ending, and your first playthrough will probably take 15 to 20 hours. But if you start to really get the game, your final playthrough will take less than 2. And once you really start to understand this game, there is nothing quite like I. I has some of the most insane abilities I've used in an immersive sim, like telefragging, literal aimbot, and a pistol that shoots anti-aircraft rounds. Combine those last 2 together for some really wild stuff, by the way. Unfortunately, a lot of stuff in I isn't very easy or even balanced properly, like spawn rates or how the hacking minigame works. Even if you're a veteran immersive sim player, you're most likely going to need to go in with a guide and maybe watching a few videos about the game, like the one I did a few years back. Do not take the cycles of guilt lightly. Oh yeah, and one last thing. This game has full-on multiplayer, which is not only just deathmatching, but co-op with 16 players. I did the latter once for the story, and it was an experience. And that's it. You now have plenty of starting points for how to get into immersive sims and more games to get into once you're feeling comfortable thinking beyond the need to follow Skyrim's quest marker. If you're interested in even more immersive sims, I did just do that tier list that covers just about all of them, but if you haven't got the time for that, I'll rattle off a few you can check out beyond this list. Thief 2, System Shock Enhanced Edition, Amnesia: The Bunker, Dishonored 2, and Weird West. Alright, counting those mentions, that's 15 games in this video. I think you'll find something you like out of all of these. I'm sure there's a question some of you might have right now. What even is an immersive sim, and what makes a game an immersive sim? I'll be honest with you. It's nebulous at best and really depends on who is making that call. I've tried to set some clear guidelines a few years back, and that brought me nothing but people screaming at me in the comments because my definitions didn't meet their own weirdly specific conditions. And just to answer the next question that might have popped into your head of why don't you try defining it again, I have no interest in getting the ire of people with weirdly specific definitions and semantics a second time around. Maybe after playing these games, you'll be able to discern your own answer and be able to figure out what is and is not an immersive sim according to you. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch this and hope you're having a nice day. If you liked what you saw here or just want to help me out, there's always subscribing and doing all the algorithm things. I definitely suggest subscribing if you're into immersive sims because I just sort of became the de facto ImSim guy a while back, and that's a fun niche to be in. Like, there's a bunch more ImSims coming out, or that have came out that I'm going to be covering that, man, there just aren't enough days in the week for me these days. If you want to help me continue to make videos, I do run a Patreon at patreon.com/charlatanwonder, where you can get advanced access to videos, standalone cooking videos with full recipes, and behind the scenes updates on what's coming up. If you're not into recurring monthly pledges, I do have super thanks enabled on YouTube for one-time donations, and if you aren't into either of those, it's all good. Let's sign off. Remember that no matter what you do, be it etching, watercolors, or doing cool tricks on your bicycle, what you do is not content. It is art. Content is a label that takes all your skills, aspirations, and dreams and grinds them up into a gray sludge that is only allowed to exist so long as it makes a line go up in a boardroom. Your art is a reflection of you by the very nature of its creation, and you in no way deserve such a fate. So get out there and fight against the contentification of everything by fighting for your art. Stay saucy, everyone. Sir. Wow, he didn't even bother to stop. He just... Oh, he posing. Frisk loves, like, that laminated cardboard. Loves to rub his little paws across it. Loves to be an upright little chonk. Are you done making loud noises and interrupting Mommy and Daddy's TV time? What are you so fixated on over there? Sir, must we make you answer for your crimes? I'm gonna have to just take that right after the recycler. If you're gonna be up all night smacking the cardboard. Okay, we're done here.